Done. Okay. There. Whew. That was I was confused there for a minute why there was no sound, but we're good. Hello, everyone who's in the chat. We'll give people a few more minutes to roll in, and in this time, I will go see if anybody has said anything about the tweet about it. Just so trying to get word out. My growing Twitch career. Got that. All right. All right. Cool. If anybody can hear me, just say something in chat so then I can just make sure that I'm not like crazy. Hello, hello. We're going to start here in a second. How's everyone's Wednesday? Today's Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. I have to say, since I joined, the Wikimedia Foundation has been doing what they call Silent Fridays, which means that there are no meetings on Friday. And the idea is to give people like focused time to work. And I now realize that from my level and below, Silent Fridays are strictly enforced. And it's a great time for people to like focus on work. But I think all the rules are broken from my level and above. So like everyone above me has like tons of meetings on Friday, and every single Friday I get to like be totally offline and just like grind through writing or other things like that, which is cool. And I'm looking forward to it. All right, it's been 3 minutes. We can start. Although I would love someone to say something in chat so I know that like it's actually happening. That people can actually hear me talk and I'm not just talking to myself. Although I guess that's okay. Cool. Thanks, Andy. All right, we can get started. So, welcome everyone to this week's live streamed office hours from the Wikimedia Foundation. My name's Chris. I am the Director of Machine Learning at the Wikimedia Foundation. Some of the other viewers in this live stream are actually members of my staff, which Andy is one of the ones who just said something. The purpose of these is to bring the stuff that we're thinking about on the team and that we're working on out as transparent as possible and give people a regular touch point where they can talk to us, where frankly they can just watch us work. We'll be doing some live coding. We'll be discussing things around some ideas that we have. And really like the part that I wanted to highlight is that like this isn't a presentation of like the status of the team, right? This isn't like an update one. This is like literally me just working for an hour and having you all come and watch and us having a conversation. So like even if you just come in and turn on your, like have the stream off in the corner while you do your work, cool, we can sort of, work together. For this particular one, I actually wanted to revisit a topic that we've been thinking about more and more. But it was a topic that we actually talked about on one of the earlier live streams, which was model cards. To take a step back, in the Wikipedia universe, the foundation has a very specific role. So the Wikimedia Foundation and affiliate organizations is funded by you all, right? Like you all are the people who pay my salaries. You go and you click that button and you do. This isn't like a pitch to donate. This is me just saying how the finances work. That's how everything is paid for. That's how all the servers are paid for. That's how my salary is paid for. That's how my staff is paid for. And we serve you. Like that is our goal. Our goal in part of product planning, in part of everything that we do is to try to make your experience on Wikipedia better, try to make Wikipedia better, all that kind of stuff. And so, a big part of that is that we need to make it so that when we use machine learning for tasks to make, say, an experience better for a particular community, the people who are a part of that community, or even the general just Wikipedia community, has a say in how that model was created, has a say in how that model is used, has a say in understanding of that model. That's because that we are serving that community, right? Like, we don't write, nobody at the Wikimedia people volunteer at the Wikimedia Foundation and in their spare time, write content. But the role of the foundation is not to we don't own any of the content, right? We're running the sites and the servers and that kind of stuff. And for us, there are times that we use machine learning in order to make the experience of editors and readers better. And so we've talked about these in weeks in the past. So a big one is some of the models that we call ORS models, which are around predicting the quality of, say, an edit or the topic of a particular model, just to make editors' experience better, right? They can see things that the model thinks is like, hey, maybe they should spend their time on and fix this one over this other one, or we think this edit's okay, and that kind of stuff, just to help editors have a better user experience. There's other ones. I think last week or last 2 weeks, we talked about add a link, which is a structured task, which we're using machine learning to make it easier for people to take those first initial steps into editing by suggesting phrases that we think might actually be links, and then presenting that to a new editor, and saying hey, we kind of think this is probably a link, check our math and see if it's true. And if it's true, submit an edit for it, and that kind of stuff. The whole goal around all that stuff, right, is to make people's experience better. But the nature of the foundation and the nature of our role in the greater, free knowledge movement and the Wikipedia community generally is that when we do those things, when we train those models, when we use, the data that we're going to use for training and all that kind of stuff, we feel as a team that we need to make it as transparent as we can about the details of those models, right? There should not be, we feel very strongly that there should not be black boxes that are producing predictions. That is not, that might get you good VC funding at some point, but that is not the goal of this thing. There is no magic behind this. We will lay all of our, cards down on the table, to use that reference. And along those lines, model cards have come up repeatedly as a really interesting method of doing that. And so when we actually started these conversations, we were thinking in terms of what we call ML model governance. So, for example, how do we know when a model is should be deprecated, right? We should remove a model. We haven't retrained it in a long time. It's getting too bad. We should just move on. How does a community tell us that they want a model? How does a community tell us that they don't want a model? All that kind of stuff. How does the community end up governing those models? That's where our initial focus is, and we still have tons of work to do in that area. But as an what we initially thought as a small part of that was the idea of model cards. And model cards, for those who are interested, was put forth in 2019 in this article by Mitchell et al. The idea behind a model card, here, let me do this to make this a little bit bigger for folks. The idea behind a model card, I think there's an example in here somewhere. The idea behind a model card is that there is a understandable single source of truth for a particular model, which is a reference for that particular model, how it was trained, where it was trained, what training data was used in it, what are the intended uses for it, what should you not particularly use it for, say the latest training data on it, what was the last time it was retrained, what was its performance metrics, how did it do on those, any kind of issues around it, that kind of stuff. So you can see this this is an example. This is I think this is like a one for smiling detection in images, and they sort of go through the different parts of it. So you could see that this is a way to present the different models that are used in a particular situation, and all the issues around it. And I can paste this one into chat for anybody who wants to follow along. For us, this was really such a great use case for us, because we have something like 110 models in production right now, and those models interface with lots of different communities, like with Dutch Wikipedia, which has their, that's the community who really cares about that model. French Wikipedia, that's the community that cares about it. Vietnamese Wikipedia, like all these different communities are all interfacing with these different models, and we don't think we have done a good enough job making all that information accessible to folks. So everything that we do on our team is open source. You can see everything that my team is working on. You can literally see we have like a public IRC chat room that we chat internally about like stuff that we're working on. You can actually see our full Phabricator board, which is the board we use to track work. You can comment on it, all that kind of stuff. So we do a lot of stuff open, but while the models that we've had have been open, they have not been easily accessible to people. It has not been very obvious to anybody who is interested what models we have in production, what training data was used in it, where's the code for it, where's the last time it was retrained, how it was trained, all that kind of stuff. We have sort of not exposed well at all. And going back to the idea of model governance, that's where the vulnerability lies in there. Because what we're saying is, hey, we're using this models, we're transparent because it's open source, but it's not transparent in the sense that you can't easily access it, right? You can't easily understand what it is. You can't, frankly, come and criticize us for it. You can't say, hey, you shouldn't do it that way. Like, that's not the right way of doing it. You need to think about that differently. And so when we came across this idea of model cards, it sort of was an answer to a lot of our questions, because we started realizing that what we could do was actually create a MediaWiki page. So like literally like sort of like a Wikipedia page, but on our wiki, not on Wikipedia. One page per model that we have in production. That page can have all the historical information about a particular model. It can also be auto-populated through like programmatically through an application with the latest training data on it. So like say if we're retraining a model nightly, we could have just every single day we like add another row to the table, and so you could see the training data for that model like back in history, right? So this is like some of it that's some of the information is sort of written by a human, some of the information is written programmatically, and you have the single source of truth for that particular model. And what is so nice about that is if you go over here, so this is just my team's page on the MediaWiki. This is MediaWiki.org. If you look at my particular this team's page, every single page right on Wikipedia has this sort of talk page for it. So like every single page has a separate page where there's like a discussion points for it. This is me just sort of posting our latest things that are happening at the foundation, or on my team at the foundation. But it means that it means that there could be a place for members of the community to talk about a particular model and provide feedback for a particular model. It means that when people propose, we'll just do the other one, like smile detection. I don't know, we'd never do that. I can't imagine ever doing that, but whatever, that's the example that they use in model cards. So this is what I'm doing. Someone proposes like a smile detection model. We can use that MediaWiki page as a place to talk about, to discuss the proposed model. So like say someone proposes making a smile detection one, they create a MediaWiki page for it. It becomes the place to talk about whether or not this is a good idea. Maybe there's like a 2-week talk session where like we don't make any decisions and people can come and like add their comments and debate whether they think it's a good idea. If we decide it's a good idea, this would never happen, but if you decide that we really wanted a smile detection, then that single like place becomes where folks can see the latest information about the model and talk about it. And also, because every single page has a place where you can actually favorite it, so you can sort of watch it. You can add it to your watch list, and then so you can like see if there's any kind of changes. It allows the ability to the community to actually monitor what's happening with that model. So if there's any kind of issue or any kind of thing, they can jump in. It is such a good idea. We feel like that we started exploring it, and like taking just a lot of the really interesting work that's in this paper and sort of seeing where we could apply it in our own use cases. And one of the interesting things that was worked on was this actually. So this is by Hal Treidman. He is a privacy engineering intern at the foundation, and we were talking to him about, okay, model cards, like this is some of the things that we're thinking about and that kind of stuff. And he went back and wrote up this document, which he's calling accountability sheets instead of model cards, which, fair enough. And so I kind of wanted to read through this to sort of see what he's written. I haven't really seen what he's written. I think I glanced through this, but I wanted to kind of read it live with you all to sort of hear his thoughts. So this is him going through and trying to understand, like basically a position paper of how we should use model cards. So we'll see how that goes, and you can sort of watch me do that. And we'll sort of go from there. There's a question in chat. Are the model cards similar to internal ML design docs created traditionally in practice, but with additional public feedback and discussion? I think sometimes I definitely think the purpose of internal documentation is often to keep the model running or to help other engineers internally understand the model, as opposed to something like the model card, which is public and out there, and it should be written in the way that both technical members of the community and non-technical folks can have an opinion about it, I think. And so you could see, like, we might actually have, say, technical documentation about a particular set of models, but it's all using the language that other people at the foundation, WMF, would know. So we'd be like, okay, we want to deploy it on Echiad using an active process, and we'll train it on the Hadoop cluster, and then we'll pass it through using Flink or something like that. Like, that's the sort of like technical, the technical part of it to make things work. And that would probably be somewhere else. The model card is more like, hey, this is our, this is like everything that someone who doesn't work at the foundation would care about with the model. And hopefully a little bit more. But I do want to sort of separate that if there is, if we have documentation that we're using the Hadoop cluster in a particular way to design something, and then we pass it through, like that's just not really of interest to anybody. And I worry that if not editing it down to like having both model cards and not model cards, we would end up with a situation where we're sort of drowning out the information that people outside the foundation would care about with a bunch of like internal stuff that they don't really know how to parse, because they don't work inside the foundation and sit with these servers all day. Hopefully that answered the question there. Any other questions from folks? I'm trying really hard to read the questions in chat when they come up, because people have been watching this on YouTube, because I post it on YouTube every single week on our YouTube channel. So I'm trying to, I realized that if I don't read the question, you wouldn't know from the YouTube recording like what was actually asked. Nope. All right, here we go. I'm not going to read this out loud, but I am going to sort of browse through it. The Wikimedia Foundation hosts algorithmic decision systems. Yeah, true. Yeah. Let me see if I can make this bigger for folks. It'll be like, I can make it as big as possible. Yeah. diverse set. I mean, this is one of the interesting things that we're moving towards is that in our current infrastructure, we're really using one type of model, which we're using, which is gradient boosted models. But we have lots of dreams of adding things like computer vision and that kind of stuff, which would mean that we would need to allow for a lot more diverse set of models to be put into production and a lot more different libraries and that kind of stuff. And the system that we're working on now, hopefully, literally, if you go to go to, this is our team's sort of homepage. If you go to this chat, which let me see if I can pull it up over here. If you go here, which is this is our actual internal chat room, and you can see our SREs sort of working out all the different issues with stuff. This is them literally building the infrastructure. And this is all public. This isn't like a private chat or anything. You can come in here and hang out and ask questions, and we're around 24/7 for it. Let me make sure I can see that. Let me go back to Hal's document here. Currently, there are no set of policies or guidelines to govern the process. That's true. We don't have good policies around. And this is where it comes around, when we're talking about ML governance, is that in situations where, I think we've been really lucky so far that there hasn't been a lot of disagreement about what models were put in production and how those models work and that kind of stuff. Because right now we're not really in a good position to say have a community. If someone, this is the scenario I keep on coming to my head. If one member from a community says, say French Wikipedia says, I've created a model that detects smiles in articles. We say, okay, does everyone else in the community want this? Is this something that's valuable to that? There's not really a great process for us. We could do a one-off thing. We could go, talk to the people that we know in the French Wikipedia community and sort of see, but there's no real process for us to, make sure that the community feels that the smile detection thing is actually something that they want as a community rather than just one person just really wants. So, it's definitely something that is critical, and we just don't really have those things in place, and that's definitely something we want to work on. This was his first document, just so you know. This document lays off the broader framework. This was great. This was really awesome. I don't know if this is available to share, so I'm not gonna click on the link, but it was really nice. It specifies exactly how the foundation ought to implement what I've chosen to call algorithmic accountability sheets. The name, of course, is subject to change. My hope is by writing this down in a clear plan for this aspect of the broader algorithmic accountability framework, we can establish WMF as a leader in this burgeoning field. That's cool. I mean, that's definitely, one of the things that on a team that we've thought about a lot is that there's an opportunity and almost the requirement that as a foundation, we become a best practice example of ethical ML, because that we are sitting in a space that is different than most people working on ML, right? This isn't a corporation. This isn't a startup. There are no investors. We serve all of you. You are all the people who pay our paychecks. And given that, it is on us to serve your interests first. And that means that, when we say, we make it difficult for you to see things, de facto hide things from you, not on purpose hide things, but hide things by making it just difficult for you to access stuff, it means that you're, not getting the best of us, right? You're unable to govern us as an organization, which is not what anybody wants. And so, moving us as an organization to a place that we are a best practice example that, one, for our community, we're serving them in the best way. But then two, other organizations that maybe have more constraints around them, say a company or something like that, can hopefully, that's sort of our long-term goal, can point to us and say, hey, they were able to do, 10 things. They really made things great. And we use them as an example of sort of the gold standard. But, we have our own constraints, so we can only do 4 of them, something like that. But at least we can sort of make sure that we're doing the best for ourselves. context-specific documents. There are at least 3 contexts in which I envision algorithmic accountability sheets should be deployed. Data sets, models, and services. To ensure clear communication, I'll define each. So data set, right, that's the data that's used to train stuff, whether it's image, that kind of stuff. The model, that makes sense. The service, a collection of models that are accessed through the same API or endpoint. Models within one service may have a variety of architectures or features. This does kind of bring up, I'll see what he's getting at with this, but it does kind of bring up the, I need to make sure that we have clear language around what we mean by models. So, for example, I've ran into this a few times. So, we have models that detect, the quality of a particular edit. So, if someone makes a change to a particular Wikipedia, the quality of that edit, or so, whether that edit is damaging or not. That's a better way of putting it. We do that for lots of different languages. And I've seen some people sort of say, oh, we have the edit, the edit quality model. But it's actually 30 models because we have one model per language. But in addition to that, right, so that's one level. And in addition to that, we're retraining models over and over again. There's lots of different iterations of the same model. And in model governance, we need to be careful of what is that unit there, right? So if we retrain a model and we decide to deploy the new model, is everything a model? Are things versions of models and that kind of stuff? And I know different frameworks like Kubeflow and that kind of stuff have particular names for those things, but it's worth noting that those names are super internal to those platforms, and there is no general consensus of what that means. So making sure that we have clear language around that. What do you call all article quality models one model? No, you wouldn't, right? But also, if you retrained one model 10 times, would you call that 10 models or one model? I don't know. We'll have to think about that one. Models within one service may have varying architectures or features, but share a unified organizational logic. Oh, okay, now I see what he's talking about. I got it. ORS, just for context, ORS is the current model management system that we use for it's model deployment and management system that we've used for a long time. It is a internal tool that was built at the foundation long before there was things like Kubeflow and MLflow and that kind of stuff. Long before MLOps was a thing. And now we're moving away from it as there's lots of great open source projects available for us to sort of take advantage of. And as a foundation, we're strong believers in open source, so we get to come in there and take stand on the shoulders of many giants, and hopefully contribute back to those, which is something that the foundation values, which is kind of cool to work at a place where it is beneficial to contribute to open source projects. If WMF were to create infrastructure for partially automated algorithmic accountability sheets and deploy that infrastructure across our algorithmic infrastructure, we'd be offering the world an unprecedented level of transparency into WMF's algorithmic decision process. I agree. I mean, and I just keep going back to this. For us to consider ourselves the only way this works is that if the general public and editors and people can come in and say how we're doing it in our work, right? This can't be sort of like a house of cards. This can't be smoke and mirrors. It just won't work that way. And one of the things that we have been talking about is okay, so say we create model cards for 110 models that we have in production, and we lay out all the details of those models and we put them all on public pages, right? So every 110 Wikimedia pages, each with details of everything that's happening with the model. What if some of the models are embarrassingly bad, right? What if we've done a poor job? What does that mean, right? And the stance that I have decided to take, and the team has absolutely decided to take, and everyone has decided to take, it's just the only way we're going to address this is just through transparency and then through humility. We want people to come and contribute to it. My dream would be that someone sees a model card and from that model card, they're able to, see that something just isn't working right. Say, imbalanced data or something like that. And then from that model card, they can see there's an issue that they think is an issue. They can talk about it on the talk page in the model card. Then they can click on a link in the model card, which takes them to the GitLab page with the actual code and the data. And they can, download it locally, right, and just run it themselves using, popular libraries without any kind of like special setup in a way that's just really familiar with them. They can, fix some issue, right? Like make some change that they think is useful and then submit it back as a pull request. That part is contingent on us revealing all of our hand when it comes to the models, right? Eat the good parts and the bad parts, because we want people to come and contribute on the bad parts as well. That is, pretty out there on the transparency front, not for the Wikimedia Foundation, but probably for ML in general. But it's the only way that we can work, right? Like, we are a transparent organization. The only time that wouldn't be true would be for models that we need to keep private to prevent abuse of the system or attacks against the system. So, for example, there might be a model that like is used in that's used to sort of identify users who are engaged in disinformation or something like that. We wouldn't there's an argument that like we shouldn't keep that model open and like available to everyone to use it because there might be abuse. Another one that sort of came up would be a model that makes predictions about individual users, and we might need to restrict access to the model to people in the Wikipedia community with like a certain level of rights. So like the most obvious one is check user status. So like as you become more senior in the Wikipedia community, there's more like admin rights that you get, and one of them would be like you could check the status of a user. If someone had that check user status, like a member of the community, they could use the model to like check out, see what's happening with a particular user. The idea being that like if you didn't do that, someone could just run it against all users, find a bunch of like false positives, and then like accuse everyone of some kind of thing, which is not what we're going for. But other than like those sort of use cases, which is very, very, very minimal, like I don't know, like less than 1% of the models. In fact, we don't even have any right now that do that in production. So, it's not really going to be that big of an issue. For anything other than those ones, having that, laying our cards on the table and just letting people work with it, I think there's just so many good opportunities for that. So many good opportunities for, say, just like we've seen before with people doing edit-a-thons, people doing tons of research studies about Wikipedia, and the community and the foundation being really open about things that are problematic, right? So like, say, the demographics of editors, like there's lots of research into that kind of stuff, and just being like, yeah, like that's a problem. We're working, we're working on it. We're not alone in trying to solve it. We're all solving it together, but these are kind of the issues. And taking that perspective to ML models and saying like, hey, we're just going to put everything out there and, come and help us fix it. This is going to be a very slow reading, I can already tell. This transparency into our algorithmic infrastructure wouldn't just increase trust in WMF as a platform, but also provide valuable data to the ML Analytics team to allow easier compliance. Yes, I agree. And the trust part is huge because, for some wiki communities, they have very, very, they're more mature. They've been around for a long time, like English Wikipedia and that kind of stuff, and they have lots of connections to the foundation. And so those communities have a lot more knowledge about how ML has been used, and because they've attended more, say, like Wikimania conferences and that kind of stuff, they've gotten to know these things. But I don't think we can be in a situation where we can just say to folks, you can't access our models, you can't really see our models, it's difficult for you to understand what models are being used for what, but just trust us. Like, it can't work like that. It has to be sort of, hopefully we'll gain trust by being as transparent as possible on this. In the following sections, I will go into the features of algorithmic accountability sheets that will be universal across context and specifics of creating algorithmic accountability sheets in different contexts. Universal features. So he's talking about like what are the he's talking about like the universal stuff. Okay, any person who wants to deploy an algorithmic component, a model, data set, or service to the algorithmic decision-making ecosystem, WMF employee or otherwise, should answer these questions. What is the motivation behind creating this algorithmic component? Who created this algorithmic component? Who currently owns or is responsible for this algorithmic component? Who is the intended user of this algorithmic component? What should this algorithmic component be used for? What should this algorithmic component not be used for? Right, so this is taking stuff from the model card work. What community approval process for this algorithmic component have gone through? What internal or external changes could make this algorithm component deprecated or no longer useful? And how should this component be licensed? Some of these ones are so interesting because when, imagine this scenario, which will inevitably happen. Someone from the community says, I want to deploy this model. We as a foundation want to support them in that. I think the big value add for the community, for us as a team, is that, say a community says, hey, I've created a model that does X, and the community says, absolutely, we love that person made that model that does X. We'd love that model to be doing it. As a foundation, we can take that on, we put that on our servers, we add that to our PagerDuty. We are maintaining and owning that model. And keeping everything up, which means that, say, the person who originally created the model as a volunteer ends up, having to go spend time doing other things, right? They're just a volunteer. So there's no requirement that they sit and maintain the system. That's on us, as, that's the reason that we're paid, is that we come and sit here every day. A volunteer should be able to come and go as they want, right? Because they're donating their time. And so if we could take on those models and then be the ones who are hosting it and maintaining and that kind of stuff, it's really useful. But from us as a foundation, what are the things that we need that person who's submitting the model to answer for us, that we can feel comfortable that is following our guidelines as a member of the community? That, for example, what was the community approval process? Does the community actually want this thing? What are the things that, what's the sort of things that if we, what are the things that might happen with a model where we want to remove it, right? Either because the community no longer wants it, or because, say model drift or something has taken place and it's actually not really a useful model anymore. Or maybe it's used in a particular project. Does that project still exist? If that project doesn't exist, then we can deprecate it and move on. And I've been thinking about what would those questions be and what would be the format that someone would go through and answer them. But this is actually an interesting approach of these sort of universal ones. And I'm sure he has other ones particularly for models, because he's clearly I assume he's gonna go into the data set part, which is frankly interesting. I know Mitchell et al. Talk a little bit about data sheets and that kind of stuff, but it's interesting of would you have model cards and data cards? Yeah, he's going for that. Yeah. It's interesting. Well, let's dive into it. Data sheets for data sets. In addition to the questions above, data set contributors should also answer the following question. How is that data collected? How is the data continuously updated? If the data is labeled, how does that process work? If that data is pre-processed or cleaned, how does that work? How is the data distributed statistically? Yeah, you can see Andy's comments over here. Yeah, I agree. I think that's true. Are there any sensitive attributes contained in the data set? Is there a difference in statistical distribution? Which models rely on this data set? These things are... do we do a data card? I don't know. I think we need a feature store. I think we need a feature store. I think there needs to be a data catalog for stuff, because in order for someone, a member of the community, to participate in the way that we want them to participate, they need the model card to understand, what they're looking at and sort of like where's the sort of homepage for that particular model, and then they need the data and the code. But just handing them the data set won't really make any sense, particularly if it's all been pre-processed for training, right? It might like the variable names and that kind of stuff like might not like be obvious, especially like the nuance around it. Yeah, it's a wonder if we do like a data card or that is part of the feature store. Yeah, but I mean it's worth noting because like I think without going into like crazy amount of details, like there's been times that people have offered to donate data to us, and we've struggled, like, yeah, well-intentioned like attempts to donate data to us, and where we've struggled is like, well, how is the data licensed, right? Like how's the data licensed? How was it labeled? Was it labeled using like hand labeling by private contractors? Was it crowdsourced? Like what was all this kind of information about it? And if they were able to answer these questions, I think it would have worked a lot easy. It would have been a lot easier, and I would have felt more comfortable about sort of accepting that data donation. This one is kind of interesting, and Andy, who's in chat, touched on this. One of the interesting things we can do with model cards is we can have, and this would be a data card, but we can have it as a mix of programmatic information and human information. So for example, like there's no reason why we couldn't have like a script or something like that actually looks at the data set, like loads the data set and then runs some kind of, like just basic descriptive information about it, and then post that into the, whatever in this case would be a data card. Because it would, one, give people more access and transparency if they wanted to ever use that data, like what things were. But then at the same time, I think it would highlight any kind of issues there were with the data, right? So if there was like really imbalanced or that kind of stuff, like there's a place to sort of see that, and we could just do that programmatically. That's interesting. That would also, yeah, it would depend if it was on the feature store or we made like a data card. But it would open up more doors for people to feel more comfortable about the data. And I would like it because, like, one of the nice things, I won't bring it up now, but how we've been training data, in the last few years has been through like a mix of human labels and the non-human labels. But one of the things I looked is the tool that we use to generate human labeled data, like right on the page where people are actually typing in the labels, like contains the license. Like this, like basically if you use this, it's going to be under this particular license, which is awesome because that means that, that we know what the licensing around all this kind of stuff, can use it for commercial purposes or, anything like that. So it's, it's important that we have this kind of information about stuff. If the data and process are cleaned, how does that process work? Yeah. Like what is it just goes back, and it goes like data governance, right? Because if you clean the data for ML and then you posted that, if you posted that data set, but like where was the raw data set? Yeah. That's like a whole nother issue. Yeah. I mean, I can see this is going to be like a thing we're going to need to work on. Like there's a lot more work here. Because you go to model cards and then the next thing you want to boost up would be like data cards or a feature store or something like that. Model cards. What is the architecture of this model? I think it's so was it XGBoost? Was it Random Forest? As the model perform on test and real world data across different languages, different geographies. Yeah, so you can sort of see you can see the confusion that I was talking about before around like the idea of model, because in my head there would be one model for each language. Oh, but maybe he's talking about models that work on lots of different languages, like a language agnostic model. Yeah, okay. And you'd break it up. Oh, that's interesting. So, okay. So, if you had a model that predicted, say, the topic of an article across multiple languages, you wouldn't just want to see how it worked on the test data. You'd want to see how it worked on language specific test data, right? Like basically like you would need to break it up in that way. That's an interesting idea. Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. If this model was retrained, how can we see that change over time, right? So one of the nice things about the new infrastructure that we're working on is that every single time we train a model, and hopefully we're retraining the model on regularly using new data, we'll have all this information, and so then we can just like push it down to the MediaWiki page with like the model card's actual like homepage, and just write that all programmatically. How does this model mitigate with data drift? Yeah. If there are decision thresholds for classification, what are their thresholds? Yeah. What services rely on this model? Which data sets does this model rely on? Yeah, I mean, this one's huge because you need both the code and the data to really participate in any kind of process. Which services rely on this model? This one's kind of interesting because one of the things that we've actually had a hard time doing on our team is understanding where our models are being used, because at the foundation, like the APIs for our models are open right now. Like if you want to use the API for ORS models, like it's just an open API. You don't need an account or anything. We ask you no questions, and so it's kind of like a mystery sometimes. It's where it's been used, and there's times where there's been like a huge spike in usage, and we just don't know why. And so it's like a little bit harder for us to sort of understand like if this is going to go on for like 5 days, or is this going to end? Like, is this like a researcher's overnight job, or is this like, some new feature that someone has developed and that's just, we're permanently going to get this workload. But it's interesting because like, I'm very conscious of like not putting any real like maintainership on community members, because if you're donating your time, you have, like you should absolutely have the right to like walk away and say like, hey, I can't do this anymore. And so you could see something that, say, someone made, just to use this example because it's a very fictional example of the let's go see, of the smiling detection. Like if someone had a smiling detection model that they used, and then sorry, I'm just trying to find this. Where's this thing? Okay, if someone had a smile detection model that they used and they built, and they used that model in their Wikipedia smile detection bot or something like that, but then the summer project ends or something like that, and so they no longer, like they sort of stop maintaining that bot, and they go over and they get a job, and they move on with life, and they don't really ever come back to it. How do we know that model is sort of like not really used anymore? And so this question like might actually like provide some hints to us that it's like, oh, it's used for the smile detection bot, and we can actually go and see if the smile detection bot is actually like alive. And if it's not alive, then we could like deprecate the model. I am so scared of turning off any model because I have no insight into like how the models are used. Like I know where it's being used sometimes, but I don't know like the long tail of that. And so even if I see a model that's not being used very often, I'm so scared of like even considering making any kind of change to it that might affect it being up, because then like, it turns out that like someone who we never have communicated with, that we have no engagement with, is actually relying on it. And so, which is not something we want to do. So this is actually kind of a weirdly important question from my perspective. For models that retrain or update on a regular basis, which is our goal, ideally we would plot statistics for accuracy, bias, and fairness. The fairness, I'm gonna have to figure out that one. Oh, bias and fairness. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this a bit with how it's so hard because there's such interesting work on quantitative bias and fairness detection, and like there's so many interesting ideas. And there's so many like different approaches, but there's no like one silver bullet, right? Like there's no like one like, oh, there's the Gulgarand algorithm and that just works, and we just, that works across all different, that works on random forest to logistic regression to TensorFlow, and it just like, understands everything that's happening. It works. So like how do you do that programmatically? I mean, definitely like the performance score for stuff should just be, in this case he's talking about accuracy, but just the performance score should be listed over time, and then frankly people would know what the performance score was we were using for it. Bias and fairness, I mean, that'd be a great dream, right? I wonder if I could dig into that more. To show if the model has drifted since deployment, this is definitely an issue for us because some of the models that we do use, a lot of the models that we do use human hand labeled data from members of the community. And because we don't constantly ask people for it, right? Like we sort of have moments where they train and then that create that data set, and then like nothing happens. Like we use them, we train the model and we put it out, but we're not asking them to retrain it all the time. There's definitely like concerns about model drift over time. In addition to the service questions or the questions listed above, service architecture should also ask the following questions. How does the service perform on real world data across different languages? What are the intersections of those attributes? How does the service minimize risk and harm outcomes? How do we mitigate data drift? How does the service handle adversarial inputs? Yeah, this is like the adversarial part. I mean, this is something I've had on like my sort of like back burner for a long time, because the models that we do are about sort of article quality and that kind of stuff, and therefore they like become part of the process that people use to look at disinformation. And obviously, therefore, there is an incentive for people to like try to game the system, right? But again, we're trying to be transparent, so we should put the model out there. But of course, if you put the exact model out there, it's easier to sort of figure out how to do gamesmanship around there. So it's worth noting like how do we end up handling something like this, where we want to be transparent, if it, like in any reasonable situation, be as transparent as possible. How do you then handle something where someone can sort of see your model, actually download the model locally, work up some adversarial attack for it, and then deploy it? Yeah. As services grow over time, it'll be important to continually update their documentation. Models are added, tweaked, deprecated. Developers should edit the service sheet to reflect those changes. This is actually why, I actually love the idea of taking the model card concept and applying it to Wikipedia, because, MediaWiki, which is the software that runs Wikipedia, that's made by the Wikimedia Foundation, is a great tool for exactly this use case. There's talk pages, there's a history of every single edit, there's the ability to collaborate, there's the ability to like have discussions, to have anybody come in and make changes, which hopefully will mean that these things can be more up to date and more lively discussions around things, which would be great. I think it'd be a great sort of single source of truth, but also like single source of discussion around models. Which would mean that if someone was interested in how a model was being used in their community, there's like a place to go, short of like emailing us on the team and then, us like, helping them figure it out and that kind of stuff, which is just, less efficient and less transparent. Other considerations, sheets as Wikidata items. Yeah, this is good. So we have 4 minutes left. I'll do a little quick thought on this because we've been dealing with this. So for those who don't know, Wikidata is the place where a lot of structured data is placed. And so that would mean any kind of thing, say around, like for example, I don't know, here's a biography and they won the Nobel Prize. Well, like you could have like a Wikidata item that's like Nobel Prize, right? Or like the person's name or something like that. There's like entities in it. And it removes the sort of language part of it, like the prose part of it, from the actual like facts part of it. And so one of the things that we were kind of thinking about is like, well, a lot of the programmatic stuff that we're thinking of putting onto these model cards, which he's calling sheets, would be things that would be structured data. Like on January 26th, the accuracy was X, and on January 28th, the accuracy was Y. Why not put that into Wikidata as structured data? And there's some interesting advantages to that. So, for example, one of the things that we thought about would be, say we have all of the structured information about a model that is targeted towards the help serving the Vietnamese Wikipedia community. We could actually have the data for that model, like the latest training date and that kind of stuff, in Wikidata, and then folks could actually go and then translate that into a model card, like take all those facts, right, and then build a model card for that one in Vietnamese, right? And so it would mean that like we could share the same facts about a model, so we could have like an English model card, an English language model card for that model, but also like a Vietnamese language model card, and they would be sharing the same information because they're using the same facts in there. It could be really cool. We talked a little bit about the Wikidata team about it, but I think it's worthy of like longer conversations because there's some nuance there, but I think it's worthwhile. We are now out of time. I have just been talking. I don't even know if people find this valuable. I hope people find it valuable, just to see us like work through these processes, and hopefully you understand like what we do all day with your donations. But let me know in the next few minutes if there's any kind of feedback to me, or any kind of things that you think we should be doing differently, or even if you find this useful, or if you really care about model cards. I think probably what I'd like to do is to have model cards be a sort of recurring topic on here as we walk through it, and so you could sort of see us over time. Try to, I think the next thing that I'd like to do is actually build up a Wikipedia model card like mock-up page, just so like you could see. There's obviously nothing on this particular page, but you could sort of, we could work through like what it would look like to have a model card for like a fake model, like Klingon or something like that, and then we could see what things we'd want to include and what kind of wiki elements we could do, like what kind of sort of like text elements on the page that we could use, like images or table of contents or that kind of stuff. Like how do we want to structure it? And then we could move on to actually using a Python library called WikiPybot to actually algorithmically generate some parts of that page for us using some fake data. So we like march towards actually building it, all the way from like the brainstorming ideation session that we had on it like a few weeks ago, which we did live on this live stream, to this one where it's a little bit more focused, to moving on to actually making a mock-up that then actually like trying to scale that mock-up. So we're out of time, but hopefully, people find this useful. If you want to come chat with us and just, come hang out like on a regular basis, this is our IRC. We have a public chat room. It is the main chat room for the team a lot of times. So you can come hang out, like see us, you can see us in the chat working. Or you can come and you want to hear what we're working on, you can come to our talk page, which is sort of like our live blog of like what we're doing. I post weekly updates or just whatever's happening. Or you can come and see what we're actually working on using we use Fabricator, but this is just like Jira or anything like that. Who's anything familiar? You can throw in comments, anything like that. So thank you all. Thank you for coming. I'll see you all in 2 weeks where we do this again, and we'll continue going hopefully forever. All right. Bye all.